Welcome, everybody. We're going to go ahead and get started as we still have participants joining. But I do want to just say welcome to this week's CybHER Conversation. My name is Katie Shuck, and I am CybHER's Chief of Strategy. With me, we also have Kampi Narakonda, who's CybHER's Chief of Operations. And I'll introduce our speaker in just a second. But we are so excited to have you here. CybHER is a program out of Dakota State University in Madison, South Dakota. And our CybHER Conversations are brought to you both by CybHER and by Peraton. We are thrilled you're able to join us today. And this week's speaker, I do want to recognize Julie Ard, who is helping governments and the government clients protect themselves from insider threats as her job and role as a principal insider threat researcher at Noblis. And she'll be able to tell you more about what that means here and her journey into the position. And so without further ado, Julie, I hand the program over to you.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here today and share a little bit of my story. My name is Julie Ard, and I'm the Principal Insider Threat Researcher at Noblis. And I want to give you a little bit about my background, and then I have a couple of stories that I want to share with you about how I got here. I got my bachelor's degree in applied math from Texas A&M University, and then I went to work in the defense industry supporting research. I started out on weapons programs, actually, and then I got into cybersecurity. I'd always wanted to get my master's degree, so after 4 years of working full-time and taking classes part-time, I went to graduate school in the fall, full-time at UC Davis, and got my master's degree in computer science. I'm also a published researcher and hold 2 industry certifications, and my entire career has been supporting the federal government. So I started at Noblis in 2019. Noblis is a little bit different company because it's a nonprofit research and government services organization. And here I get to focus on my specialty, which is insider threat, from a couple of different angles. We've got internal research programs. My company, Noblis, invests millions of dollars into research, which is very unusual. I also support the research community by doing peer review for research journals, and I've been interviewed as a subject matter expert for several different projects, and I also contribute to insider threat thought leadership for the field. And then finally, what I spend the majority of my time doing is supporting my federal government clients on insider threat and cybersecurity. I really like working in this area of insider threat research because it is just a fascinating problem. It's a problem that's literally as old as the time of Caesar. Insider threats are people like Snowden, Manning, and the Navy Yard shooter. Insider threats are different from external threats because they have an affiliation with the organization that they damage. So this is different from outside threats like hackers or competitors or things like that. It's not solely a technical problem. It's both a technical problem and a people problem, which makes it really interesting. There are a lot of different types of security that are all completely different career fields in their own right, like physical security, personnel security, and cybersecurity, just to name a few. So combating the insider threat requires collaboration from different parts of the organization. We coordinate with HR, legal, managers, ethics, workplace safety, law enforcement, plus all of those different kinds of security that I mentioned earlier. All of these organizations were already working on pieces of this problem before insider threat became its own field about a decade ago. And now part of the challenge is that they all have to come together to solve it. I first got interested in this problem while I was in graduate school studying cybersecurity. My husband, who is a veteran, was deployed with the Air Force when the Manning WikiLeaks story broke, and that made me mad. My academic advisor had some experience in this field, but I already had a plan in motion for my master's thesis project, and I did not want to start over. But after that, I did go into this field when I graduated in 2012, and I actually went to the National Security Agency to do research. The reason that's relevant is because then Snowden happened in 2013, and that made me really mad. I want to point out I worked in research, not operations. I don't know anything about what he did that's not public domain, but I wanted to tell you this to kind of describe how these really high-profile incidents actually personally affected my career. From there, I had an opportunity to do some research for the National Insider Threat Center at Carnegie Mellon's Software Engineering Institute, and then several other opportunities since then in the federal government, doing research and operations specifically in insider threat. But what I really want to tell you about are a couple of experiences during my education that had a really big impact on my life. So the first one is from when I was in 7th grade. I was taking algebra, and I was actually not doing well. I was failing. I remember that my teacher was also a football coach, and I was not into sports, so I didn't really feel like I had anything in common with him. My mom was a teacher. She was a music teacher, but she saw me failing algebra when I was otherwise a good student. So she got me a math tutor. And at the time, I felt like I was stupid. I felt like I shouldn't need tutoring. I should be able to do this myself. It was my fault. I didn't deserve help. I felt bad because it cost money. My mom had to take me there and back and all of those things. But you know what I realized? I realized that I only happened to be in that class with that teacher. I had that teacher out of all the possible teachers that could have been teaching algebra that year at that school. And I happened to have whichever math textbook my school district or the state chose to buy that year. But that teacher and that textbook were not the right resources for me to learn algebra. People have different learning styles. Some people need to spend longer on one section, but not as long on another. And teachers, honestly, they have a lot to juggle with 20 or 30 or however many students there are, in the same class at the same time. So in my tutoring, I felt like we spent the entire first month once or maybe even twice a week on the exact same type of algebra problem. But my tutor had the time to spend with me, and she was really patient with me, and she really helped me understand what I was supposed to be learning in algebra. And after a couple of months, I actually went from failing my tests to acing them. I did go on to take advanced math classes through high school, and then when I got to college, I ended up majoring in math. It was not actually my first major. I started out in engineering, but I ended up getting my degree in math. And that's not to say that it was an easy time. It was still really hard, and there were several times that I had to retake classes and get a tutor. I joined study groups. I had study buddies, and it honestly really took a village. So not everyone is going to end up majoring in math, but I have to tell you that being able to understand math is the single most important investment I've made in my education. And that is an investment that has really paid off in my career. So if you are struggling with math, I really hope you will explore some of those other resources to see if you can find a tutor, get a different textbook, whatever. You might make a friend from another school as a study buddy, but it is really worth it. I once heard the quote that luck is preparation meeting opportunity. So you can't predict which opportunities are going to come your way. You don't have control over that. But what you can do is to do everything within your power to prepare so that when opportunity comes, you can take it. So the other thing I want to tell you about is when I first learned programming. I started out by tweaking games that we had on our home computer by changing the colors, making error messages say funny things, and stuff like that. I remember I had an assignment in 8th grade to program a song and make the computer play music by specifying the note and the timing. Well, I was in choir that year, and 2 of my friends and I were singing a trio. So after I completed my assignment, I programmed our 3 parts into computers, and we started it playing on 3 different computers. So back then, we did not have 2.4 gigahertz dual core processors, which is what I have on my computer now. I looked this up yesterday. In 1993, I probably had a 30 megahertz processor, of course, single core. And for comparison, the processors that we have now are 80 times faster than that. So the reason I want to tell you this is because I learned how important processor speed was by playing around with my choir trio in that programming class. The computers were way off. The timing was way off. The tones were different because of slower processors. There's more room for error and variations in the timing than with the faster processors we have today. So when playing the song, it was less accurate. So that was just really funny. The reason I wanted to tell you that story is because there are so many things you can do in computer science, and you can find a way to make it fun to learn about. It is your future. You're going to do well at the things that you enjoy enough to tinker with them on your own, like me programming my choir trio. Nobody told me to do that. I just wanted to play around with it. And you might need to get a little creative to make something that is difficult way more enjoyable. The final thing I want to mention is that being a specialist has really worked for me. You may have heard of imposter syndrome. There's a really good book I can recommend on that. Being a subject matter expert has really helped my confidence because the number of people who know more about insider threat than I do is really small. So when someone asks me questions about it, I have all of the information and we can have a really good discussion. I actually had someone call me the Google of insider threat a couple of months ago, and that made me feel really good. When in the past, I may not have known as much as I do, and I wouldn't have felt, as confident answering questions or even just guessing about things. So this is my personality. Everyone is different. Some people go a mile deep and a foot wide like me, or other people might want to go a mile wide and a foot deep in a subject. But the only way to know what works for you is to try it. So feel free to look me up on LinkedIn. If you search for Julie Ard Insider Threat, that should do it. It's never too early to start building your professional network. And I do also do mentoring. So drop me a line and I would love to hear from you and hear what you're up to. Thank you.
Thank you so much for being on CybHER Conversations. When you were talking about math and how you had initially felt, a little bit hesitant when you were in 7th grade, I totally felt that. I hated math, and what you said about the material or the teaching style not being effective for you, there are certain things when everybody learns at a different pace and a different style of teaching, and not the same style applies to everyone. And that's what I feel too. When I was in school, I could not wrap my head around math. I still can't. And it's just, I never really had a preference for math because one teacher was not very patient. And so, yeah, I totally understand that. We will go ahead and start the Q&A. So please remember, if you have any questions, please ask them in the Q&A box in your Zoom control panel, and we will make sure all the questions are asked. So our first question to you is, if someone is not sure about going into a cyber career path, what would you tell them? How would you advise?
Try it. You can take, there's all kinds of free classes online now. So you just would try it out. You could, try something at your school or community college, say, can I shadow, the help desk and just start talking to people, go to a conference. You can, it would take a little more work to try, but it would still come in handy down the road. You can get a certification, see if you like that as an educational experience, and get a job on the night shift and just try it. I mean, like I said, everyone's personality is different. for me, I ended up with a lot of college credits because I had to try different things before finding what really worked for me. So that's the only thing I would say. That's the only advice I can give on that.
What is a memory that you have, or the best advice that you've ever had when you understood a hard topic, something relating to, you know?
Yeah. I'm not sure I got advice specifically about hard topics, but I will tell you that persistence is a really valuable personality trait. It's kind of funny because, you know, sometimes it's called stubbornness and other times it's called persistence. But it's really the same thing. So when tackling something really hard, you know, break it. Actually, this is the best advice I could give on something hard, in addition to being stubborn. Break it down into small pieces, bite-sized pieces, you know, as a joke. You know, one of my favorite bosses used to use the term, "Stop trying to boil the ocean." So, you know, no matter what it is, coming up with a plan is one piece, right? And the plan might be really vague, like, let's see what's out there, you know, then let's try things, and then let's choose the best one, and then let's write a report. That's a really broad plan that I just came up with on the spot. And that's one of the pieces you can break it down to. And then I just, you know, listed several pieces that you can tackle from there. So when something's really hard, really big, it can always be broken down into smaller pieces.
Do you have a favorite math subject?
Yep. Yeah, I really like modern geometry. I have Escher, you know, actually from a calendar. It's just from a wall calendar. I saved you know, all of those, you know, pictures and just stuck them up, you know, all over my apartment in college. That's not the subject that I did the best in. I did the best in abstract algebra, actually, ironically, given my, you know, algebra tutoring, or possibly because of it. But I really like geometry. When I was really little, I remember my mom had like a booklet that had these gift boxes that you could pop out, you know, of the cardstock, and I just made all of them like in one sitting. And I still have those too. So I really like geometry and abstract modern geometry.
Very cool. So relating to your job, we have a few questions about your job. So you work with insider threats. So how can we tell if someone is an insider threat? What's the process you follow?
Yeah, so each organization, to get a little bit academic for a second, you would have to define an insider, which seems obvious, but it's not always obvious. You know, it could include third-party vendors, or it could not, or it could include former, you know, people that formerly were with your organization or not. This is kind of something for lawyers to decide who's in scope. And then once you've defined who your insiders are, then you can define the threats that you're concerned about. I actually helped write a paper on the categories of insider threats. Broadly speaking, a threat would be, you know, anyone that damages your organization. But let's see if I can remember the 5 categories off the top of my head. There's information theft, sabotage, security compromise. Oh my gosh, there's 5 kinds. Workplace violence. I'll think of it in a minute. but you'll have to decide which of those are in scope. And a big difference is in the physical world versus the cyber world, because you have information theft, which you would detect and respond to with a different team from physical theft, for example. So that's one big difference with theft. And then also with workplace violence, usually has a different response team that needs to act like immediately, versus information theft. I mean, it's nice if you can detect it and respond immediately, but that's not always how it works out.
What does your day-to-day look like? Is it the way they show you stuff in movies and TV series?
Nothing is ever as cool as it looks like in the movies. So hate to break that to you. So my average day, we have a 9 a.m. stand-up call with the whole team, which is something that we implemented since the pandemic. We're all working from home full time. So start with that. Have a handful of meetings. Actually, I have too many meetings throughout the day with various customers, team members, just kind of depending on what's coming up. I've got some long-term projects that I'm working, got some short-term, things that come up. And then I get my individual work in between, or, late at night, or just whenever it happens. So I'm in my home office, right now. My day consists of getting my coffee downstairs and coming into my home office and working at my computer. That's pretty much my day.
Very cool. So can you tell us a little bit about the different types of insider threats that you've dealt with so far?
Yeah. So like I mentioned, the physical threats are usually handled by a different team, but there are different indicators. So indicator is a word we use a lot because you can also think of like red flags that are proven in research, to predict, different threats. Like for example, information theft. There's a reconnaissance phase, right, where people are accessing things that don't have to do with their job. We'll detect, anomalies in what they're looking at, and also compare that to other people in their department and other people with their job title to identify, when something is not normal. Then there will be kind of like a gathering phase where there's a lot of downloads. This is also called data hoarding, and then once someone has something together, they might try to obfuscate it, by burying it under a boring file tree of meeting minutes. Not trying to give anyone ideas, but they'll probably be trying to hide what they're doing. And then the final step is the exfil. It's got to get out, right? So there are a number of vectors, that we would monitor for the actual exfil, email, web upload, printing, which is not an issue so much right now in the pandemic because no one can hook up their own printers to their computer. But there are, I think, 5 or 6, vectors that we look at for exfil. So that's one of the bigger types that we look for.
Okay. So then do you need to have any knowledge of psychology or any understanding of psychology to do threat hunting?
Great question. This is one of the things that makes insider threat really interesting, because you need someone with that knowledge on your team. Okay. I described several of the specialties that you need before, and it's actually really helpful if the analysts come from all these different career fields in order to provide that perspective, because you need psychologists, you need data scientists, you need cyber people, you need network people, you need law enforcement background, because the insider threat program, like I mentioned, because there were existing capabilities already, people had loss prevention already. They already had, workplace violence programs and HR. It's impossible to be a specialist in all of these things. So you've got to have a big, broad, diverse team. And then there's this term called the hub, the insider threat hub, because you have to take information from all these different places, run it through all these different kinds of people, and then the group that responds to the insider threat is not necessarily going to be the same based on what it is. If it's exfil, or if it's workplace violence, totally different.
Okay. So suppose that there's someone who's just graduating college that's interested in working with insider threats. What type of jobs should they be looking for? Because I'm not sure if someone can be hired like right out of college into a good team that works with insider threats. Are there any other avenues that would lead them to this?
Sure. Yeah. So you're right. We don't hire very many entry-level people into this, because usually we'll pull someone from one of those backgrounds. There's a DoD policy that lists like 8 departments. I can't think of what they are right now, but it would be unusual to go straight into it, but not impossible. You could go into law enforcement as an analyst. There's a whole field of background investigators for the federal government that it's a hugely standardized process that kind of covers the areas of your personal life that the government is allowed to look at when they consider a hire. And so people, can get really familiar with that, because those can be, grounds for termination or referral to counseling, depending on what the situation is. You can get into cybersecurity, of course, which is what I did. That's the avenue I took, or into behavioral science. So it would generally be from one of those fields. There are, this is also an interesting thing. The main people that hire for insider threat are the federal government, because there's an executive order mandate. Also, the financial sector has really robust, they have requirements under Sarbanes-Oxley, I think. So they hire insider threat analysts, and then the third category are just, any contractor that does business with the federal government has to have an insider threat program, but it might not be like an operations center. It might only be a handful of people. And then companies with proprietary info that are really, really serious about protecting it, like Apple, Tesla, DuPont, large companies like that, they would also be hiring insider threat analysts.
Okay. We are almost out of time, and so I will wrap up the Q&A with one last question. What advice would you give to the young people that are watching the session?
Geez, after the addition to everything else I said. Well, let's see. We talked about stubbornness, aka persistence. The luck is preparation meeting opportunity. That's a really big one. You never know what opportunities are going to come up, and you're not going to consciously think, geez, if I had only taken that elective, I would be prepared for this. That's not going to consciously occur to you, but everything you learn along the way, you're going to find a use for it in the future. So, try stuff, try everything, see what you like, and run with it. And there's a way to make things interesting that are difficult or don't seem interesting. So that's my smattering of advice.
That is wonderful advice. And I especially love, and I wrote down that luck is preparation meeting opportunity. I think I'm going to put a reminder up for myself. I think we can all use that reminder. Now, I am going to launch a quick poll for all of our attendees so we can learn just a little bit more about you. We appreciate you completing this. I also want to remind you that you can find out more information about CybHER by going to our website at cybher.org or following us on social media on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. You can also subscribe to our YouTube channel, which is youtube.com/CybHER, where this CybHER conversation and other conversations, as well as podcasts and other videos, are posted, and you can learn more about all aspects of cybersecurity. We also invite you back to next week's conversation, where we will be featuring Lisa Thie, who is the lead for Data for Good Practice and Launch Consulting Group. She is a founder, CEO, and angel investor. I've heard her speak before at a conference, and exciting person. So you'll want to be sure to come back for next week and all of our upcoming ones, that you can find out or find more information on our speakers at our website at cybher.org. Again, thank you so much, Julie, for joining us today. I have learned so much about insider threats, and I will definitely be connecting with you on LinkedIn as well, and I encourage all of our participants to as well. Thank you, and we wish you all a great week.
My pleasure.